Hi, everyone. Dr. Sarah, your brain gal here. And I'm really excited today because I have a very special guest and a special treat with us today that I can't wait to share with you. So, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, no, thank you for having me, Sarah. Yes, hello, I'm Jennifer, everyone.
Yes, and I can't wait to talk about this topic today. We're going to talk a little bit more about getting to know yourself. I know the topic here is, parenting is one obstacle at a time because no one ever puts anything away. And we're going to talk a little bit about the things
True.
we might not be putting away in order to parent also. So I'm excited to have you, Jennifer. You want to tell people a little bit about you and then we'll start chatting.
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone, I'm Jennifer. So I am the founder over at Rebel World and run and the voice behind Lady Rebel Club, which is basically a movement, a community supporting, advocating, and hopefully uplifting women and other marginalized gender entrepreneurs who are neurodiverse or who have hidden disabilities.
I love
So
this.
that's kind of my jam, if you will.
Yeah, and I love the Rebel Club. Oh, such a cool name.
Thank
People
you.
who follow me for a while probably know I'm very outside the box and I'm not really one to follow the rules just because they're the rules. So just the whole concept is really
Well, I
exciting.
know exactly. And it's funny because I've had a few people say to me, the lady rebel is, that's kind of, are you a lady? I'm like, well, if anyone knows me at all, then it was like the complete oxymoron of that you could have. But there
Mhm.
you go. Yeah. Thank
No,
you.
I just think it's absolutely fabulous. And I love, we had this conversation offline right before just about neurodiverse as a term and,
Mhm.
how from a brain-based perspective to me, everything is neurodiverse. So can you talk
Yes.
a little bit about, neurodiversity in general, just for the people who are watching that may not be familiar with that term?
Yes, well, I guess neurodiversity as a whole is really just about all brain function, isn't it? So when you then look at the term neurodivergent, which I am neurodivergent, it's, I guess, your brain functions slightly differently to what, would be quote unquote, normal sort of brain functions in some manners. It typically includes things like, being autistic, having ADHD, dyslexic, things along that lines,
Mhm.
OCD, even Tourette's, yeah, would fall into that.
And so when it comes to obstacles in your way, you can see being neurodiverse as, an obstacle, right? Or
Mm,
neurodivergent, as you said, an
yeah.
obstacle, or you can see it as just another way of getting to know yourself. And what I like about the term is it has given people kind of, I don't want to say a box to put yourself, but a label, an understanding of who you are
Yes.
and who you might be. And I think that's really important as a parent. I mean, I know you have two children, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think that I mean, what do you? I feel like that really getting to know yourself and understanding how you grew up, what the
Hmm.
parenting style was from your family, and then what you may want to bring can be really important. And then also the types of kiddos you have, right?
Oh, definitely. And I think, first of all, looking at that, at that terminology and that box, if you will, I think we all have to be very real when we have conversations like this, and we have, I guess, perspectives in that human beings in general, and you probably know this better than I do, we like to label things and we need to label things because we have to categorize things, don't we, in order to sort of process them and understand how we fit into that space and how they fit into our space. So I think to come out of the door saying we don't want labels and we don't want to be labeled isn't really, it's not going to happen, let's just call it, right? So I think having this concept, which was really coined, the phrase, more in 2019, is it's great because it takes a lot of the stigma out of it that was around things like being autistic, having OCD, being dyslexic, whatever it might, whatever sort of neurodiversity aspect it might be. It takes a lot of it out of it, and it allows us to really approach things with more of a positive attitude. And I think it's especially important for kids,
Mhm.
and I know when I looked as myself as a kid, now looking back, because I was very late diagnosed,
Uh-huh.
and so much makes sense now. And looking back, I go, oh my goodness, how was this ever missed? But there wasn't the conversations that we have nowadays. And I know for a fact, like my mother's parenting would have been very different had she have known. Just like I've had to change parenting styles. And I know we sort of were briefly talking about, my eldest is neurotypical and my youngest is neurodivergent. So like you have all kids, I guess. I suppose you have different styles with, like you said, depending on the personalities. But yeah, so we've had to adapt to just allow us to better suit his needs, to help him get the best out of himself and understand himself more.
But I love what you started saying also, which is that you have to understand yourself
Hmm.
before you
Yeah.
can then shift that for your child, because there
Hmm.
are a couple different paths to this. First we have to know who we are, where we came from. I love what you said about your mom.
Hmm.
We need to get education into who we are ourselves, but then also the differences we may be seeing in our kids. And
Yeah.
what I love about the Raising Brains movement and Lady Rebel Club, the concept is that things can be different, and that's okay. We're all
Yes.
telling you to lean into who you are, not to lean away from who you are. So,
Hmm.
for Raising Brains, the model is never to become something you're not. It is never to follow A,
Yes,
B, and D.
exactly.
To figure out who you are, what you like, what's important
Hmm.
to you, and how that was influenced by how you grew up. You mentioned your mother too. So I'm
Hmm.
sure that there are some things, silly things for me. We grew up eating dinner at the table every single night. So if we don't eat dinner
Yeah.
at the table every single night, I think, oh my gosh, I must not be a good mom.
Yeah. Yes.
Or
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
even was education valued? Was it not valued in my
Hmm.
household? We were just having this conversation actually last night. We were talking about grades and getting straight A's, and many of my friends' families will celebrate grades. In
Hmm.
my house, they weren't celebrated. You were supposed to. That's what you were supposed to do.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's it. Yes. It's all so different, isn't it? And it's funny, the domino effect and how, you know, even two very similar people having maybe even a similar experience and how that affects their parenting style in very different ways. Whereas,
Mhm.
maybe if you have very strict parents, like my brother's very different parenting style than what we have, and but the same mother. So you're kind of, but how we have interpreted that, we've taken that and it's obviously been mixed in, with our own personality and everything else, and then and that's kind of come out the other end. But it is interesting, and I think I think you have to know yourself, but I think also it's very interesting in that I think that's a learning process that we
Yes.
do with our kids, because our kids teach us more about ourselves
Mhm.
than I think anything else. So as our kids grow and change, and and our relationship with them grows and changes and evolves and all of this, I think I've learned so much about myself from
Yeah.
my kids. I know my husband has. I've learned a lot, and not just as a mom, not just what kind of mom am I, but like what kind of human am I, but also what kind of human do I want to be,
Wow.
and I think it's for me, it's raised a lot of things like that I've really had to think about. And it's almost kind of, self-circling, because then I think back and I go, right, well, maybe these things that I was doing because maybe my mom did them or didn't do them or whatever, whatever the case was. Yeah, maybe I need to rethink that, because maybe that's not really, the kind of mom I want to be, or the kind of, human I want to be, or things of that nature.
Oh, wow.
And something I say to myself all the time is, if my kids are sitting here 20 years from now in the same situation, talking to their kids, what is it that they're going to think about me? And yes, I'm not perfect. I know for sure I haven't gotten everything right and never will. But, what's going to be their general impression? What would be things? What are going to be the little stories that they tell their kids about me? Well, I remember now when when my mom used to do this or my mom used to do that. And it's those lasting things that I think influence influence as well. Or things like I hear, my mom used to do this. Oh my goodness, like you were saying, I've turned into my mom. And that can be a positive, or it can be a negative. And even my husband, I will say, you sounded just like your mom right there. And I will go, no.
Well, and it's understanding and awareness of the fact that that is going to be, I always say it's always your
Yeah,
mother's fault, no matter
I
what.
know.
It's always so take the pressure off and just allow it to be. But
Yeah.
I think that it is the insight and self-awareness that you are building clearly with your
Mm,
kids, that I hope that I'm building with my kids, that when they do have those conversations about mom, they also have some insight into who you
Mhm.
were, what your intentions were, all of those things as a person,
Yeah.
as well as a mom, and that's the thing they're gonna model, because when we talk about this, it's about
Mm.
modeling, right? So when they're talking about all the
Yes.
things they remember, we want them to understand that, yes, they're gonna be influenced by every experience they had,
Mhm.
with us as a mother, and that we were influenced by our parents,
Yeah.
but it is that, striving for insight and self-understanding that will continue to serve them well throughout the rest of their lives, because like you said, things have changed so much
Mm.
generation to generation. If your mom knew what you knew now, things might be different, but
Yeah.
having an understanding of, well, she can, if she were to continue to go through this process of just really trying and really trying to gain knowledge in the way that you are and the way that, your movement suggests, I think that is what is going to benefit the kids in the future. I think it's doing
Yeah.
that work. And you're right. The number one challenge, right, is having kids, because it challenges you to know
Mhm.
who you are in a way that you haven't had to necessarily do before. But if you start with that,
Yeah.
that work you do, and the work, and I always say, do it out loud, the work that you do, talking about
Mm.
how you're figuring it out, when you make mistakes, what that looks like, all of those things is going
Yeah.
to serve your kids well, because there are things that we don't know now, just like there were things our parents,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, and I think too that, like, I don't know what your house is like, but, like, in our house, you have to have a very thick skin because
Mhm.
especially our youngest is very blunt and very honest. I think kids in general are very, very honest, aren't they? So they're great, again, a great reflection back, and they call you on your BS, at times they're like, "Well, that doesn't make any sense because last week you said this, and
Right.
those 2 things don't." So I think it's good that, yes, we know ourselves and we continue to learn about ourselves, but that also that we're open to feedback
Yeah.
from our kids, and that we're open to say, well, hey, do you know what, yeah, I'm doing this, and I know I've thought this before when I've within the scheme of talking to them about something. I'm like, well, why am I doing it this way? I'm doing it this way because my mom did it this way, but that was
Yeah.
20 some years ago.
Mhm.
And my child is now reflecting this back to me saying, look, can you have a different conversation in a different way, because I don't really, that doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm going, well, it does. And especially if things like around technology and all of this, we
Mhm.
can't have the same conversation, because me saying you can't spend all this time on a game, and then
Right.
my child feeds back to me, but that's how I interact with my friends. That is, yes, they have real friends, real world friends, but especially maybe for those that have social anxiety or stuff like this,
Right.
that can be a great, added alternative, that takes some of that sort of anxiety out of it.
And
Um,
it's kind of the way that we do things. Look at us. I mean, where are you
yes, I
located right now? I didn't
know.
ask you.
I know. I
Where?
know. So I think it's rolling, I guess, rolling with the times, and like you're saying, using those that your own experiences as pivot points, but
Mhm.
being open to changing those and adapting those, and molding them with the times,
Absolutely.
definitely.
I definitely think, and it's interesting too, because I think in terms of what our kids get exposed to and the different conversations we're having, my son has told me a couple things in terms of feedback. Like, sometimes, mom, when I say this, I don't need you to tell me you understand, because you don't understand,
Mm.
because it didn't happen to you. And meanwhile, my purpose in telling you to
Wow.
understand is I could see how you could feel that way. That makes sense.
Mm.
I want to validate those feelings. But he said, don't say that. Please don't use those words. Just listen to me. I just need you to listen and say, okay, and that stays,
Wow.
those kinds of things. But when you say you understand, it takes away from it what my experience is.
Yeah, that's wow,
And it changes,
that's
right?
yeah,
Going
definitely.
home and
Like, I'm
turning,
going, whoa.
right? And I just said, thank you for telling me what you need,
Mm.
right? Because that's what we're trying to teach kids, is those communication strategies. And it's funny when your own kids pick up on those things and they parrot them back.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, we're going to make this shift. Speaking of feedback,
Yes.
right? And trying to make
Yeah.
those changes. And then
Well,
in
that's
terms
it.
of conversations they're having that we weren't having either, they had a big inclusion
Yes.
diversity week at school.
Mm.
He came home and he said, Mom, do you think I have autism? You know, because I was listening to this today, and I think I might, I don't know if I do, but I think there's a lot of those things that I do. I do a lot of those things that
Mm.
make a lot of sense to me. And, that's where this neurodiverse term to me is so fun, because it's
Yes.
we've talked about a spectrum and that everything kind
Yeah.
of falls on like a normal curve. And we talk about
Mhm.
typical, we're talking about what most people do. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just where
Yeah.
most people are, and that there are these wings on either side of being able to have some strengths or weaknesses in different places, and that's what makes people interesting. But
Yeah.
neurodiversity term is really fun because kids
It
start to
is.
be able to experience it that way, right?
Well, that's it, and it's, even if you think of it, in the visually using that like spiky profile, that's kind of a great visual to sort of use to explain to people and kids, because obviously it's visually it's easier for them to sort of understand as well, about how we're all very different. And I think that as a model is a great tool to use to explain all different kinds of differences, not just neurological ones.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I think that's so great that your son brought home that, and that started that conversation. And I think we can learn, like you said, we can learn so much from our kids if we're open and we take the feedback on. And it is funny because I know even that was very
Right.
different than how
Oh
we
yeah.
were with our parents. It was like
That would
the
should.
whole yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
Mhm. Right.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think
Um,
you're really right about that, and that's the thing, these parenting styles are gonna shift, but having a forum for understanding what styles are is
mm,
great, but first, even before that, you need to be open to the feedback, you need to be doing
yes.
work for yourself consistently and constantly so that you can
Hmm.
continue to be a better mom. Because what makes a good mom isn't that perfection, it is
Yeah.
consistently trying, right? Continually trying to
Yes,
get it
yes.
done.
Well, I think if we can explain to, and I know you had talked briefly about, giving that explanation. And I know with my kids, and this again would be very different to the style that my mom had, where it was just do this because I'm telling you. Now that does sometimes creep in, and I'll have to catch myself and go, right, no, that's not going to fly with my kids anyway. But it's knowing why I'm telling them to do a certain thing or not do a certain thing, or asking something of them or whatnot, and being able to explain that to them. And I think, because I know myself well enough that I know I don't like doing anything. And I find I struggle, in fact, to do something if I don't understand the point of it, the purpose of it. There's this is just some kind of arbitrary meaning, then why am I doing this? So why would I think that my kids would be any different? So if I know that about myself, I can go, right, okay, yes, I like to ask people to explain things, and I will ask questions until I understand something.
Right.
That if I can then, assume that they're the same and roll that into how I communicate with them and say, right, well, I need you to, I don't want you to do X, Y, and Z, but here's why. Here's my thinking behind that. It
Mhm.
allows them to see that, I guess too, that maybe you're a human, and not just like robot mom who just says do this and don't do that. But also that you've really thought about it,
Mhm.
and even if they come back with feedback or a thinking that you haven't thought of that might, opens up a different conversation, at least they can see that you've thought about it and it's not simply a don't do this or don't do that.
Well, and from my side, you're raising a brain, right? So you're
Yeah.
making those connections for
Mhm.
them by telling them what and why instead of just
Yeah.
through, because there's a good portion of time where we were seeing adults that didn't have the capacity for coping and adaptive skills and thinking
Mm.
through problem solving and things themselves because there was that, no, you do this because I'm your mom and I said so,
Mhm.
and not really helping to build those independent skills. And we saw this over
Mm.
the pandemic. When we had
Yeah.
the pandemic, a big major event we couldn't save anyone from.
Mhm.
That's when we saw what different kids were capable of, what their coping styles were, what parenting styles were, what we thought. I mean, how many people have
Yeah.
shifted careers and really gotten to know themselves over the pandemic course, that force
Mm.
of having to go inside. But I think that's going to be a good thing in the long run because I think
Mhm.
between that understanding of, okay, well, we need kids to be able to handle things when they come up. We went so extreme to doing everything for them that
Yeah.
we didn't allow any of that little bit of failure. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, having a neuro divergent, I guess you would call it, correct me
Mhm.
if I'm wrong, but two different kinds of kids, right? More typical,
Yes.
and what that is like, and how you shift your parenting sometimes around that.
Night and day, to
Mhm.
be to be honest, it has been night and day, and it took us a while to shift it and to figure out how best to shift it and in what way we have to shift. And with my youngest, he has a very, very like extreme level of anxiety around his neurodiversity, and his brain is basically constantly, it sees everything as a demand,
Mm,
even things that are good. It doesn't
right.
matter.
Of course.
So as with a lot of neurodivergent kids, some simple strategies, like we always had a visual schedule, and things of that nature. Um, but everything we have to kind of put into a choice.
Mhm.
Whereas with Dylan, it would have been like, right, go clean your room,
Right.
and he would have went, right, okay, go clean your room before you go do this. But with Callum, we're very much having to present options. And we find if we don't do that and sometimes forget or whatever, yeah, it doesn't always, the conversation usually doesn't go so well.
Right.
But it's presenting choices so that, even if you're still saying, go clean your room, but there has to be a choice. Well, you can make the choice to go and clean your room now, or you can make the choice to not clean your room now, and the consequences are this. So you're still kind of saying the same thing, but you're not.
Well, you're helping to build those pathways that may not
Yeah.
naturally be built in, with
Yes.
our
Yeah.
typical kids. And
Yeah.
I think that takes a lot of knowing who you are, because
Hmm.
if you feel like a good parent and you know that something is what you need out of that interaction, but also
Mm.
trying to teach them, then you're going
Hmm.
to be okay. I think sometimes the difficulties, it's difficult to make a parenting shift like that in general,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. But it's even harder when you question yourself, whether you're doing the right thing, whether you
Mm.
what you want, well, he should clean his room. Well, why should he
Hmm.
clean his room? Should
Yeah.
he clean his room
Yeah.
because you think you're only a good mom if he listens to you? Is
Yeah.
it because, actually it would be good for him to have a clean space? Does he,
Hmm.
what does that need to look like? Are you trying to teach him about consequences, that this is a
Yeah.
requirement and so this happens when you don't? And when you start kind of shifting it and seeing that in that raising brains kinds of style, I think it becomes at least more manageable to attempt to make that change. And then once you start
Mm.
to get it, not that it's ever perfect, right? You're never going to,
Yes. Yes.
but you start to see the differences in your two little brains that you have, and you can make those shifts to be able to better accommodate them and feel still empowered, and understanding who you are and what you're bringing to the table too, so that when things
Definitely.
you can apologize and you can say, okay, well, what can we do
Mm.
better? And it is a
Yeah.
conversation back and forth, and not a demand or they do this or you are bad, right? Or they're bad,
Yeah.
one or the other.
Yeah. And I think too, it's understanding, that, and this, like, I love what you're doing, and the movement and everything. And, I very much think that it is understanding that, these are little humans. They're not our robots. They're not, they don't have to be exactly like us. In fact, in a lot of ways, won't be like us in any way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and equipping them, and I know especially, we were always aware of that with my eldest, but much more, I suppose, aware with it with my youngest, simply because of him being neurodivergent, having to help him develop extra tools and strategies. And that's really been the whole process. Because I remember back in, like, when he was in P2,
Mm-hmm.
saying, right, well, here's where I hope for him to be at, in P7, so that he doesn't have to have the visual schedule with him anymore. He
Mm-hmm.
can maybe make notes, this is, the classes I need to do, or this is the things that I need to remember. So it's taking him through and thinking of the future and going, well, what strategies do we need to, give him, to not to change him, per se, but to allow him to, better engage with his environment, and also so he can tell others. And I think this is critical, tell others, this is what I need. And I think it's that empowerment. And for me, that's one of the biggest things, hopefully, touch wood, that if I do with our, do that, if I am able to pass on to the kids, is that ability to speak up for themselves, to say, this is what I need, this is what I need in order to be able to do my job properly, or this is what I need in order to, if you want me to, be in this relationship, these are the things that I need from you in return,
Absolutely. And you're
yeah.
talking about connecting dots, and I think that when you have a more neurodivergent brain, what makes it's interesting, because I think you're right. You learn more about yourself, you learn more about your child, because you have to fill in the gaps and actually teach
Mm,
some of the steps that other kids might naturally pick up on.
mm,
So you start to learn about breaking things down and what that looks like. It's kind of like if you
yeah.
have a child that has trouble reading, and you have to go
Mhm.
back and kind of relearn how you learn to read. You realize that this
Yes.
is really just a circle with a line, and then we just call
Yeah.
that an eye, and then we give it a sound, and how silly that is in
Mm.
a lot of ways, and
Yeah.
you start to break it down. But you do the same for executive skills, cognitive
Mm.
skills, behavioral skills too. When you
Mhm.
have a child who may not pick up on it naturally, or who needs it connected in a little bit of a different way, and when you
Yeah.
do that, you learn a ton about yourself. And
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I just think what a great conversation today about understanding who you are as a person and how to raise brains and also be a little lady rebel at the same time. So, thank you so
Rebel brains.
much.
There you go.
Love that. I think we're gonna do that now. We'll talk about lady rebel brains, and hopefully we'll chat again. It was so nice
Yes. Thanks for
to
having me. It's been lovely to chat.
joining me.